Hi everyone. The lesson for today is scatter diagram. A scatter diagram is also called scatter plot and XY graph. So, what is a scatter diagram? A scatter diagram graphs pair of numerical data with one variable on each axis to look for a relationship between them. If the variables are correlated, the points will fall along a line or curve. The better the correlation, the tighter the point will hug the line. So, when to use a scatter diagram, the first is when you have a paired numerical data. Second, when your dependent variable may have multiple values for each value for your independent variable. And third, when trying to determine whether the two variables are related, such as when trying to identify potential root causes of the problems, and after brainstorming causes and effects using a fishbone diagram to determine objectively whether a particular cause and effect are related. And another one when determine whether two effects that appear to be related both occur with the same causes, and when testing for autocorrelation before constructing a control the chart. So before by do the scatter diagram, so we need to have a procedure to do that. So first, the first procedure of a scatter diagram is collect pairs of data where a relationship is suspected. Second, draw a graph with the independent variable on the horizontal axis and the dependent variable on the vertical axis. For each pair of data, put a dot or a symbol where the x-axis value intersects the y-axis value. If two dots fall together, put them side by side, touching so that you can see both. Third, look at the pattern of points to see if a relationship is obvious. If the data clearly from a line or a curve, you may stop because variables are correlated. You may wish to use regression or correlation analysis now. Otherwise, complete step 4 through 7. Next, divide points on the graph into 4 quadrants. If there are x points on the graph, the count x over 2 points from top to bottom and draw a horizontal line. And count x over 2 points from left to right and draw a vertical line. If a number of points is odd, draw the line through the middle point. The next procedure rather, count the points in each quadrant. Do not count points on a line. Next, at the diagonally opposite quadrants, find the smaller sum and the total of points in all quadrants. Example, A equals a points in upper left plus points in lower right, and B points in upper right plus point in lower left, and Q is equal to smaller of A and B, N is equal to A plus B. Next procedure. Look up the limit for N on the trend test table. If Q is less than the limit, the two variables are related. If Q is greater than or equal to the limit, the pattern could have occurred from random chance. So let's talk about naman sa types of the scatter diagram. You can classify scatter diagram in many ways. I will discuss the two most popular based on a correlation and slope of the trend. These are the most common in project management. According to the correlation, you can divide the scatter diagrams into the following categories. First, scatter diagram with no correlation, scatter diagram with moderate correlation, and scatter diagram with strong correlation. So, let's talk about the first topic, the scatter diagram with no correlation. So what is the scatter diagram with no correlation? This diagram is also known as a scatter diagram with 0 degree of correlation. Here the data point spread is no random that you cannot draw a line through them. Therefore, you can say that this variable has no correlation. The second is scatter diagram with moderate correlation. This diagram is also known as a scatter diagram with a low degree of correlation, which is here the data points are a little closer and you can see that some kind of relationship exists between these variables. Next is scatter diagram with strong correlation. Sa diagram naman ito ay nakikilala bilang isang scatter diagram with a high degree of correlation. Kaya naman, ang diagram na ito ay ang data points are close to each other and you can draw a line by following their pattern. And in this case, you can say that these variables are closely related. So as discussed earlier, you can categorize the scatter diagram according to the slope or trend of the data points. So they have five. So the first one is scatter diagram with strong positive correlation. Second is scatter diagram with weak positive correlation. Third is scatter diagram with strong negative correlation. Fourth, scatter diagram with weak negative correlation, and third, scatter diagram with weakest or no correlation. So, ano nga ba ang mga ito? Alamin natin. A strong positive correlation means a visible upward trend from the left to the right. While a strong negative correlation, ito daw ay visible downward trend from the left to the right. And the weak correlation means the trend is less clear. A flat line from the left to the right is the weakest correlation, as it is neither positive nor negative. A scatter diagram with no correlation shows that the independent variable does not affect the dependent variable. Next is scatter diagram with weak negative correlation. As the value of x increases, the value of y will decrease but the pattern is not clear. So, ibig sabihin, hindi pa ito klaro. Magulo pa siya. Walang kinalalabasan niyo. Parang wala kang maintindihan. Hindi pa maliwanag sa'yo. The next one is the scatter diagram with no correlation. There isn't any relationship between the two variables to be seen. It might just be a series of a point with no visible trend, or it might be a straight, flat row of points. In either case, the independent variable has no effect on the second variable. It is not dependent. So, let's talk about the first topic, the scatter diagram with no correlation. So, what is the scatter diagram with no correlation? This diagram is also known as a scatter diagram with 0 degree of correlation. Here the data point spread is no random that you cannot draw a line through them. Therefore, you can say that this variable has no correlation. The second is scatter diagram with moderate correlation. This diagram is also known as a scatter diagram with a low degree of correlation, which is here the data points are a little closer and you can see that some kind of relationship exists between these variables. Next is a scatter diagram with strong correlation. Sa diagram naman ito ay nakikilala bilang isang scatter diagram with a high degree of correlation. Kaya naman, ang diagram na ito ay ang data points are close to each other and you can draw a line by following their pattern. And in this case, you can say that these variables are closely related. So, for the scatter diagram, meron naman tayong limitation sa paggagawa nito. So, a scatter diagram cannot give you the exact extent of the correlation. And a scatter diagram does not show a quantitative measurement of the relationship between the variables. It only shows the quantitative expression of the quantitative change. The chart does not show you the relationship for more than two variables. In short, in the summary of this lesson, the scatter diagram are useful in determining the relationship between two variables. This relationship can be between two causes or a cause and an effect. It can be positive, negative, or have no correlation at all. The first variable is independent, and the second variable depends on the first. To analyze the pattern of the relationship, you change the independent variable and monitor the changes in the dependent one. A scatter diagram can have two independent variables.
So hi guys, so for today's video, the topic for today is about the correlation analysis. So what is the definition of correlation analysis? Correlation is the use to test relationships between quantitative variables or the categorical variables. In other words, it is a measure of how things are related. The study of how variables are correlated is called correlation analysis. The some example of data that have a high correlation is your caloric intake in your height, in your weight, and your eye color and your relatives' eye colors, and the amount of the time you study and your GPA. The some example of data that have a low correlation or not at all is your sexual preference and the type of cereal you eat, the dog name and the type of a dog biscuit they prefer, and last, the cost of a car wash and how long it takes to buy a soda inside the station. Yun yung mga some example of the high correlation and the low correlation. So the correlation are useful because if you can find out the what relationship variables have, you can make the predictions about the future behavior. Knowing what the future holds is very important in the social sciences like government and healthcare. Businesses also use these statistics for budget and business plans. Next, the correlation coefficient. The correlation coefficient is a way to put a value to the relationship. Correlation coefficient have a value of between -1 and 1. A 0 means there is no relationship between the variables at all, while -1 or 1 means that there is a perfect negative or positive correlation, which is the negative or positive correlation here refers to the type of the graph of the relationship will produce. This is the pictures na nakikita niyo sa screen. Yan yung example. Para mas malinawan kayo, dito sa kaliwa, yung may R is equal to 0.4, yan yung positive correlation. Sa gitna is the no correlation as in 0. And the other side, in this right, is the r is equal to negative 0.4, it is negative kasi may sign naman na negative. So, the example of the correlation analysis is the positive correlations, negative correlation, and the weak or zero correlation. So, in the positive correlation, a positive correlation between two variables means both the variables move in the same direction. An increase in one variable leads to an increase in the other variable and the vice versa. For example, spending more time on a treadmill burns more calories. Next is the negative correlation. A negative correlation between two variables means that the variables move in opposite direction. An increase in one variable leads to a decrease in the other variable and vice versa. For example, increasing the speed of a bicycle decrease the time you take to reach your destination. Ibig sabihin is, kung gaano kabilis ang takbo ng isang sasakyan, ganun naman kabilis para makapunta ka doon sa pupuntahan mo. Kung gaano kabilis ang time. Okay, the next is the weak zero or the zero correlation. No correlation exists when one variable does not affect the other. For example, there is no correlation between the number of years of school a person has attended and the letter in his or her name. So makikita nyo dyan sa picture sa screen na sa number 1, ganyan natin makikita. Ayan yung sinasabi nating large positive correlation. The second is medium positive correlation. Makikita natin na medyo nasa dikit siya. Yung gitna pinakang line, nandun yung mismong line, and yung mga dot is nasa gilid. And the next one is the small negative correlation, which is parang may nabubuo siyang mga shape na parang worms like that. And the last is the weak or no correlation. Ganyan, kalat-kalat. So in statistics, correlation refers to the fact that there is a link between various events. One of the tools to infer whether such a link exists is correlation analysis. The practical implicity is undoubtedly one of the main advantages. To perform reliable correlation analysis, it is essential to make in-depth observation of two variables, which is give us an advantages in obtaining result. So, they have the sum of the most notorious benefits of the correlation analysis are 1. Awareness of the behavior between two variables. Because a correlation helps to identify the absence or presence of a relationship between two variables. It tends to be more relevant to everyday life. The second, a good starting point for research. It proves to be a good starting point when researchers start investigating relationships for the first time. Third, uses for further studies. This is that the researchers can identify the direction and the strength of the relationship between two variables and later narrow the findings down in later study. The second is the simple mathematics. Research findings are the sum 1.00. They can be only 3 potential broad outcomes of the analysis. So this is the advantages of correlation analysis.